Previously on Popping Collars.
And what about you, Betsy? Do you want to get us started?
I always get us started.
You do.
It's because your name is first alphabetically.
It is.
You're the first person I see on the screen. That's part.
And that's why I pay extra to Google Hangouts. So welcome to Poppin' Collars, the podcast that lives at the intersection of faith and popular culture. My name is Betsy Gonzalez, and I serve here at the Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia, as head chaplain. And with me tonight are two of my co-hosts. First, Greg. Greg Knight, where are you? What are you up to?
Hey, Betsy. I am the director of Children and Youth Ministries at the Church of Bethesda by the Sea down here in Palm Beach, Florida. Poppin' Collars is always my favorite version of the show.
Poppin', for sure. All right, well then let's get to old Liz. There's Liz. Liz, how are you? Where are you? What are you up to?
Hey, Betsy. I am the canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Nebraska. And our diocesan convention, which we stubbornly call our annual council, is this week. So, in fact, when this episode goes to air, we will be driving to Scottsbluff, Nebraska for our annual gathering of the diocese.
Ooh.
Wow. And so you have towns that are able to like hold people, like hotels and like stuff and things.
We do. That's
always such a consideration.
It is. But Nebraska has towns that are big enough to hold.
Like a meeting space where everybody can be. I mean, I don't know.
Convention centers.
Nebraska, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bishop Barker. I'm just apologizing.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to insinuate that you didn't have civilization.
You have electricity there, Liz? Are you able to
automobiles? Yeah. We moved seamlessly from sepia to black and white to color very recently. We're doing great.
Lord. All right. Just one tumbleweed rolling by. All right. So finally, we have our special guest returning to the show. He's been on a couple of times. Friend of pod, Burl Salmon. Burl, Where are you? What are you up to?
Burl Salmon, and the Associate for Pastoral Care Outreach and Christian Education at the Church of Bethesda by the Sea in Palm Beach, where I have the great pleasure of working with Greg Knight. Yay. And we are heading to Diocesan Convention this week too, Liz.
Yay.
So we're all going to be praising the Lord at the same time.
Amen.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, good stuff.
My friends, we are eking ever closer to episode 100, but this is episode 94 of Poppin' Collars. And for today's topic, we are right at the tip of what is new, taking a look at a limited series that only has 3 episodes currently out of the full 8 that are going to be a part of the body of this work. And all of them are long. They're kind of like these mini encapsulated movies. And it is the new series by Mad Men creator Matthew Weiner. It is the Romanoffs, currently playing on Amazon Prime. And it is a trippy, fascinating, sometimes frustrating look at the story of the Romanoffs, Russia's opulent royal family, one of the richest in the world at their height, and they ruled Russia for over 300 years. And then the reign of the Romanovs came to a tragic and vicious halt in the heat of the Bolshevik Revolution in the summer of 1918, when the royal family was gunned down and assassinated. God's chosen leaders on earth, as they saw it. So this series kind of takes an interesting look at this story. So we see stories of descendants of the Romanov family. We see what the name kind of means and plays off. We get to kind of see how a dramatic retelling of the story plays out. So these 3 episodes so far are all very different from one another. So I know some of us have watched more or less of this show, but kind of based off of what you've seen so far, what has really struck you, stood out to you about it? There's a lot going on visually, storytelling, the actors are awesome, but I'm really curious kind of what has grabbed your attention. Burl, let's start with you. What have you thought about these first episodes?
You know, I think the thing that hangs with me is the idea that does the past live on? I mean, the whole idea of the Romanoffs is this reigning royal family that, of course, met a tragic end. And their mythologized and they're storied, and there's the story of the perhaps Anastasia, and so there's this mythology that lives in all of our culture that helps us tie to something where we've never been. So we've never been royal, especially in the U.S. So we are always fascinated by this sort of study of the royals. And here is the most tragic royal family there is. And how does it come down to us? In what form do we still hold on to something that was? Is it through an egg, a Fabergé egg? Is it through a bloodline? Is it real? Is it not real? What does that look like? So I'm fascinated by how the past is revisited in the present.
I think the show kind of is not what I expected, which is great. You know, in a lot of ways it's better than I expected. I didn't know that each episode would be its own individual short film, basically, all different with all different genres. So it's hard for me to tell yet what the through line is other than the Romanoffs and their descendants. But I think that what struck me was that in each of these stories, the family line is very important in how people understand themselves. And in other ways, it's really not important at all. Like each of these characters, we meet them in the midst of their own interpersonal conflicts, their own struggle with meaning. And in some ways, the fact that they are linked to this family history is inconsequential. It doesn't matter that much. So I'm interested to see how it plays off. And of course, there's a lot of humor about it too. Like,
especially when you find yourself on a Romanoff family cruise.
Right.
There's a lot of weirdness in that. There's a horse on a just
what's the line that the guy has at the table is we're from the Sarasota Romanoffs.
Right. Yes, I immediately thought of you and Burl. Because I'm pretty sure there's got to be some Palm Beach Romanoffs. Right?
There might be.
There might be.
When I first saw the show and I saw that it was a follow-up to it was Matthew Weiner's follow-up to Mad Men, and that he was using a lot of the same actors that he had for Mad Men. I think by the time Mad Men wrapped up, I finally got a sense of what Matthew Weiner was trying to go for with that show, which is basically kind of a long story about how did we get here, like in our nation's history? Like, how did we get to the point where we're being advertised to 24 hours a day, and everything feels marketed and everything feels slick and everything feels corporate. How we inherit sin, I think, is kind of the point of that show, or at least that's the point that I took away from that show. You know, when we just hear story after story of, you know, those who have getting more and those who don't have having less, it smacks of that. Wait, how do we create systems that benefit 1%? Like, where does that even come from? Like, how do we even do that as human beings? And having the opportunity to sort of follow this through line of the wealthy family, right? The Romanovs. What would be the legacy of that today, right? And who would these people be who would be descendants of this?
The Romanoffs next to the Manson family are my favorite murder, right? They're the, so I'll watch any documentary, I'll research it, I'll do, so I got into like the Victoria show and then started Wikipediaing everybody and seeing how, oh my God, all of Europe is related to Queen Victoria. All of this kind of intermingling, that kind of royal obsession stuff too that you were talking about, Burl. I've appreciated the fact that each of these are so different from each other. I think that's what I've really loved. I've loved how they're shot. They're just beautiful.
They are beautiful.
The cinematography is really cool. Just the way it can kind of rest on sumptuousness, which you would think isn't as much present in the second show because you're contrasting this kind of sad suburban kind of life. But then you get on the boat and then it's just, fabric and color and uniforms and dresses and, and so they each kind of have that element happening in them. But I think also for me, the idea that looking at the Romanoffs as a story, the original story as being something that was so long ago, is actually not that long ago.
I'm just curious about this idea of hanging your identity on the last dynasty. Like what does that mean for us right now as Americans? It does feel a lot of the times like Rome is falling, that separation between the rich and the poor that you mentioned, Greg, is so great. Kind of the blood sport of our entertainment, all of it. So it's interesting to just think that if someone if it brought you a lot of meaning about who your family was, that it was the last dynasty, the last royal people of a particular area. Like, what does that mean for you? Why would you hold on to that?
Betsy, you're right. This is a murder of a family that happened 100 years ago. 100 years isn't that long, right? That's not very long ago. The fall of Rome, it always makes me think though that, Rome falls when as a Roman, you're probably least expecting it to, like the thing about society and the thing about culture is that you can never really anticipate, when it's going to be over for you. And to think that the Russian Revolution just basically sweeps through and rewrites the entire history of that country over the last century, because the decadence got to the point that it was unacceptable by the populace. You would never know that if you were in the seat of power.
I think the other aspect of this thing that really gets me going is the Rasputin angle. I gotta admit, he touches my love of cults a little bit, right? My love of the megalomaniac leader.
So this is tying into your Manson thing.
Yes. Oh, totes.
Yeah.
Crazy eyes for days, right? Like all over it. This relationship between the church and the family and the divine right of ruling and what that can kind of look like in that time period. And I'm wondering whether any of the episodes are going to talk some about that angle of it.
We've hit on this, but this reminds me of a Faulkner line. We mythologize the past, and we do a lot with the past. And in Requiem for the Nun, he writes the line, "The past is never dead; it's not even past." And this idea that we never shake it, but what we do is we adapt it, or we mythologize it, or we change it, or we keep reliving it in our own ways, or whatever the case. But 100 years, as you say, is no distance whatsoever. That's within photography. I mean, if you think about it as a documentary art form, photography existed, which is one of the things we know about that family, is that they're photographed, and so we know them as people. And so it makes it really present. We can see the people who died. We can see how they look like the English royals, which we identify with. So there's this weird sort of they're exotic, but yet they're one of us. And then maybe are they still with us? And the idea of the continuous thread through history, and how it comes down. Do we inherit it? What do we do with it? Because it's not dead. It's not gone. And how does that past still inform us? We're still fighting these battles. The rich are still getting rich. The poor are still getting poorer. The idea of the middle class that they reference, what's happening to the middle class in episode 1 doesn't even exist, because none of this is new. None of this is new.
I think that the interesting thing about the past is never dead is that, you carry some of the problems of the past with you. I think that's what I loved about that first episode was how they carry the racism of Europe and all of that stuff forward with them into 2018, stuff that probably should have been dead and buried in 1918.
The dialogue between the two of them, Hajar, whose name is very close to Hagar, which is
Hagar, which Aaron Eckhart calls her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, this woman who's sent out and sent away but is still this ancient link that draws us all together, right? Through Abraham. I found that fascinating, but just that here, let me run you through Muslim Christian, issues through, breakfast pastry. That was amazing. Liz, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the reason that they want that apartment is not because they're connected to the wealth of the Romanoffs or that they care about that. It's because they can't afford to live in Paris.
Right.
Which
Because who
is,
can?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's the reality that so many Americans are living with today, that when they have that dinner party with their friends in that episode and their friends are reflecting on how they live in a smaller apartment than they grew up in, their children don't have the same opportunities that they had. And when I visit other cities that have a different housing economy, certainly than my city does, I'm just amazed by the wealth disparity. How can you possibly afford to live in some of these places? And yet we all kind of walk around as if that's normal.
Who can live in San Francisco, which is so funky, right? Like San Francisco is the place where everybody could live. And now,
Seattle is that way. I mean, that's where I grew up. It's a completely changed city. When I visit New York, it's the same. And of course, there are lots of cities like that. And then even smaller and mid-sized cities have their own version of it. But, she had let that apartment become a museum in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. For her, it meant so much for the history of their family, which was a tragic history that included the Nazi occupation of Paris and
her son's
the death of her son.
Yeah. It meant so much to her, but to her nephew and his girlfriend, it meant a place to live.
It's funny because what it made me think of was when Brene Brown talks about scarcity and how we're desperate to like hold on to what we have. And like we act as if like the world is full of scarcity, like scarce resources that we have to scramble for. And that the gospel is all about abundance.
But for poor people, there is scarcity. Right. Like Brene Brown is a middle and upper middle class gospel that you can tell yourself, I can tell myself, and I do, I struggle with this and I try to live into this, that, yes, I live with abundance. I do. If I was poor in America or anywhere else in the world, I would be hustling and scrambling for what I couldn't get. And so the gospel also tells us that, yes, we have abundance, but also Jesus prefers the poor. And for those of us who are not poor, we have a real invitation, is a gentle way to say it. to stand alongside them.
So this show is coming out on Amazon right now. Ballyhooed, probably, because it's a pretty prestigious like piece of art. That first episode, I mean, it's hard to film something in Paris and get bad shots anyway. But that first episode is gorgeous. Like the shots that they get of Paris are incredible. And so you have this show which feels very slick and polished and produced. And it has like this kind of feel of decadence and richness and opulence to it a little bit, as far as the kind of actors that they get and the length of the show and all of that. You couple the reality of this show with the fact that the number one show on television as of last week was The Conners, which was the Roseanne spinoff, which was very much in the news for being like, oh my gosh, this is great. We finally have like working class television again for people to watch. And it makes me wonder, when you used the word silo before, I wonder if we kind of do that with our entertainment a little bit too. Like we create entertainment that's mass entertainment and we create entertainment that's elite entertainment. And it makes me wonder about how those two communities talk to each other.
But guys, what is the Romanoffs about? Yeah. The premise is like, here are a bunch of stories about people who are related to the Romanoff family. But why?
Yes. My guess is that it's all really intentional based off of where we are right now.
Yeah.
I think it's really intentional based off of the president that we have, the siloing that we're experiencing, how we're separated from one another. That the Romanoffs, when you really look at the letters and the isolation that they were under and just all of that, there was,
weren't they like corrupt?
Oops, we accidentally shot people at this protest. This was bad. Oh no. And, what were you going to say, Liz?
Weren't they like corrupt though?
they were living under a system that had been created.
I mean, like,
That's the way the world worked.
I mean,
right, but I mean, I'm just, it was a populist revolution that murdered them and brought the end of their dynasty.
Yes.
So,
but I think it's when we're talking about in our society right now, tearing down structures that everyone just assumes that's the way it is. This is the way the prison system works, or this is the way the education works, or this is the way, how, I don't know, whatever. But I think that they were living in the same way. This is just the way the world works. And we're the Romanoff family, divinely chosen, and we're just doing our job. This is our duty.
I think that class is one of those things that is such a huge motivator for people's actions in this country, because what money and social status mean are opportunity for so many people. The opportunity of wealth is such a strong pull on our lives, I think.
And Greg, I would actually add to that, and I talk a lot about this, is that while we are supposedly a classless society in the United States, we have no peer system in this country, we are in fact extraordinarily stratified, but we don't know a language to talk about it very well. And it informs everything that we do. And while we can say it doesn't exist, it absolutely exists, and it exists like you're talking about. And I think one of the problems that we have is that we don't have the skill to speak about it, and we get wrapped up in it, and we argue, and it pits one side against the other side, and it's a further stratification because we don't have words to talk about a class system in the United States.
Yes, agree.
we're talking about privilege more now than maybe we have before, but that's that's different.
Is it?
Part of the criticism that I heard after the election is poor white people rejecting this notion of having to check their privilege. And it's like, don't tell me that, let me tell you about how I can't get a job or, whatever. And there are so many intersecting planes, I guess, of privilege that we all inhabit at different times and are advantaged by in different ways, even when we don't want to be.
Another additional layer to the show is that it's Russian. Like it's about a Russian family.
Yes, right.
I think which I think is a significant piece of information in our current culture today, because it draws in a little bit of that sort of othering, enemy, all of that sort of, stuff that we layer sort of that Russian label onto, right?
Well, that's the angry Russians that killed this family, Greg. That's who you're talking about. We're talking about the glorious time before that, when everything was great.
I'm sorry, I'm confused.
And we were all friends.
Where are we on Russia these days?
It's like the Jonathan Van Ness podcast. Is Russia cute right now? Like, I'm not sure. Is it? Well, they haven't assassinated anybody at their consulate lately, as far as we know.
Yeah, attention. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Greg, I agree with you there. It is also this, when you talk about a country holding on to its storied history too, you watch Russia do that with itself all the time.
Oof. The Russian backdrop of this is definitely one of those things. I remember, Liz, actually, to your point about, the narrative coming out of 2016 being disenfranchised white voters. I remember specifically someone on my Facebook page saying, Russia didn't tell me who to vote for. Right. And it's like that, all of that is on top of each other and is woven through like how people are having conversations with each other and talking over each other and talking past each other and talking beyond each other. I think you're right, Burl. I think communication is such a key part to this.
That's why I'm all against Facebook right now. And again, I'm not going to get into it here on this podcast.
You're trying to get into it. Okay,
it's too complicated and it's too large a conspiracy theory. But it does feel like when we talking about politics, we're really talking about Facebook. And we're all a little embarrassed to say that, because I don't believe I do not believe that most people are actually having these hard conversations with people with whom they disagree interpersonally. Some of us are, and occasionally, but I think that a lot of times when we talk about talking about this, we're really referring to something we saw on Facebook.
Yeah.
And, someone actually said, we were having this conversation at church with civil discourse. And yesterday, someone was saying how she actually has seen friends of hers begin to say, this is not a conversation I want to have on Facebook. I'd love to private message. Can we continue the conversation that way when you live at some distance with one another? Or can we meet for coffee? Instead of trying to hash out these yelling points on social media. So there's a modicum of awareness that we're beginning to have. But I think you're exactly right. It's social media is no place for conversation. It's just a place for posing.
Bumper stickers.
Yep.
It's a place to post your bumper sticker.
We've come to the point in the show where we like to offer a little staff pick, a little piece of media of some variety that one of our hosts is consuming and wants to recommend to the rest of us and to you. So, Liz, you have a pick tonight. What have you got?
I do. Thanks, Betsy. And I'm very excited. My pick is a book, and I've been geeking out on BookTube lately. Does anyone else watch BookTube?
No.
It's YouTube channels about books and book reviews by people
Nerds.
who read a ton of books. It's so fun. I love it so much. Anyway, so I feel like I am hosting my own little BookTube right now. And so the book that I just read is a great book. I'm going to show you guys the cover because you can see it, but our listeners can't. Called The Golden State by Lydia Kiesling. And I should do a little preface saying that I know Lydia Kiesling in real life, only sort of. So like this is sort of like a friend staff pick.
Oh.
A good friend of my friend Hannah, and it's really lovely. It's a novel about. It's like perfect for our times. About a woman who is the mother to a 2-year-old child. She's married to a Turkish man who visits Turkey for a work event, and on his way back, his green card is confiscated, and he is exiled back to Turkey. And the context is they're constantly trying to get him home. But meanwhile, she's left as a single parent. And one day she's sort of fed up with work, and she decides to pick her daughter up from daycare and take her to a family home that she inherited in a small town in Northern California. That's like a trailer in a trailer park. And while she's there, she encounters a secessionist group who wants to create their own state in the state of California because, they're tired of the rest of California stealing their resources and they have to pay taxes on them and stuff. And it's sort of her coming to terms with her life as a woman in her 30s, parenting a small child. She eventually meets a much older woman. So there's some sort of reflection that happens in that friendship. And what I was struck by is this description of parenting a small child that felt so real to me as a person who doesn't have children. It was a great mirror of a time in life where part of you just wants your child to leave you alone and go to sleep and you kind of hate them. And then part of you loves them more than you can ever imagine and longs for their body to be near your body. And like this incredible intensity of both of those things. Like, I love you and please go to bed. I love you and please stop touching me. So there's a lot of reflections about that was just really compelling. And the prose is beautiful. The sort of cultural stuff about xenophobia and Islamophobia and rural communities. And there's one beautiful scene where she takes her daughter to visit a little Episcopal church in a very small town. And as it's leading up to that scene, I'm thinking like, oh, here we go.
Episcopalian screwing it up.
What's she going to say about this small town?
Gabriel and the Walking Dead screwing
right,
it up.
which like the communities that I worship with most often are really small Episcopal churches in small towns. And she nailed it. Totally nailed it.
It wasn't. You mean the priest wasn't like sitting in a pew waiting for someone to walk through the door so that they could have?
No, the priest wasn't there because he, visited a bunch of congregations, so they were doing morning prayer, and it was, 5 people, and they knew why so and so wasn't there, and they were beautifully welcoming and awkward, and it was perfect.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So The Golden State by Lydia Kiesling. Meanwhile, check out BookTube. It's a delight.
Lovely.
This is like a 2-for staff pick. the book and the sword.
But thank you, Liz. Thank you so much for a little recommendation. Two-parter.
I like it. Books.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of Poppin' Collars. You can find Poppin' Collars wherever you get your podcast needs met, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all sorts of things. Spotify.
Oh, yeah, we're on Spotify now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. So we're up on the Spotify. We're also carried each and every time by Episcopal Cafe. We love Episcopal Cafe, and you will too. Go there for all of your Episcopal bishop search needs or whatever is happening out in the world. You can find it on Episcopal Cafe. But really want to thank you, Greg. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Burl, for joining us.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for the fun conversation, everybody.
And keep those collars popped.